Hey everyone, welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing the nonverbal communication of Lionel Dahmer. That would be Jeffrey Dahmer's father in an Oprah interview that he did some years ago. More on that in just a second. Let's go ahead and roll the intro. I'm excited to say that today's video is sponsored by Hunt a Killer. If you do not know what Hunt a Killer is and you are also subscribed to this channel, I feel like you are probably really going to appreciate this box set. Hunt a Killer produces immersive narrative mystery games, books, and other experiences. If you love true crime content and feel like you can just never really get enough of it, then I suggest checking out Hunt a Killer's exclusive premium standalone games, premium multi-part cases with 15 hours of gameplay and narrative, or even a subscription to a new and fresh case that unfolds every 6 months. The items in the box are both realistic in how they feel and also how they look, and the sets include intricate details crafted by a talented team of creators, writers, artists, and game designers that creates a very truly authentic experience with unparalleled immersion. With Halloween just around the corner, Hunt a Killer's horror season, Blair Witch, is now available as a box set. The self-directed storyline is perfect for people who are looking to maybe test their skills against the set's supernatural forces that kind of lurk in the woods there. Hunt a Killer has offered a $10 discount to the subscribers of Observe to utilize on any purchase if you use the link in the description of this video, or you can use my code OBSERVE. Again, for $10 off your order, follow the link in the description of this video and use my code OBSERVE at checkout. Thank you again to Hunt a Killer for sponsoring this video, and back to your regularly scheduled programming. Okay, for those of you who have not seen the video that I have done on Jeffrey Dahmer and would like to have a little bit more context as to what is going on in this specific case, in case you just haven't heard of perhaps one of the most notorious serial killers in history. So if you want to be able to know more about that, go ahead and follow the link in the description of this video. That will give you some background to this. In this, we're going to be watching Lionel as he talks about his experience of being a father to Jeffrey and how that will all play out, and seeing if there are any indications or hints as to what could have led Jeffrey down the path that he is on. Let's go ahead and dive into the video itself.
This is the father of the young man who committed those crimes. He's the father of Jeffrey Dahmer, Lionel Dahmer. Today we're talking with parents who all somehow, some way, raised violent sex offenders, child molesters, rapists. And we're asking, what goes wrong from the time a child is born to the time they are savagely somebody else's child? That's what we're here to try and figure out today, so that other parents can stop this from happening to your own children, so that you might notice the signs and be able to do something before it's too late. Did you notice the signs, Mr. Dahmer?
No, the only signs that I saw were shyness and reluctance to engage in social interactions, that sort of thing, but no, really no overt signs of any kind.
Okay, I wanted to go ahead and include that rather intense introduction because that is what Lionel was stepping onto the show for. This is the pretense that he was setting and everything along those lines. Now, with his nonverbal communication, just from what we're seeing so far, it is very neutral. He does have possibly a slight contempt smile in there, but it's such a small one, and it's not lining up with any specific emotional display or reactive circumstance that would allow it to be more of a tell, but this might be just more how he rests. This might be his baseline. So now we're going through and we can kind of hear how his tone is, and so right now in this part, especially where there's less confrontation or anything along those lines, I'm watching to see just how he behaves during this interview to be able to make our accuracy just a little bit higher. So let's continue watching this.
One of the things you wrote in the book called A Father's Story, when you're trying to account for how this happened to your son and to your family, one of the things that you say, though, is that this same sense of something dark and shadowy, of a malicious force growing in my son, now colors almost every memory I have of his childhood. In a sense, his childhood no longer exists. So that when you look back on little things, things that you thought were little things at the time, somehow seem to foreshadow this monster that was created over the years.
Yeah, it's a sort of a retrospect sort of thinking now. When I look back on things like the time I was at Iowa State University in university housing, and I went underneath the house to clear it out of trash and debris.
And he was 4 years old at the time.
He was about 4 years old, yeah. And
because you smell something under the house.
yeah, civet cats. It's a member of the skunk family, and I wanted to go underneath and fix it up so they wouldn't get in again. And I found cans and bottles and bones of mammals that the civet cats, the skunks, had eaten. And so I cleared all of this debris up, including the bones, and put it into a metal pail. And Jeff was there, and my former wife was there, and it was just an ordinary operation at the time, just a cleanup operation.
So you gone under the house and you found that these little skunk-like creatures had eaten a lot of the rodents.
Yeah, and left bones.
And left the bones.
So I'm going to go ahead and pause this. Obviously, this doesn't have much to do with Dahmer as of yet, Jeffrey Dahmer as of yet. But I will note that as Lionel is speaking, I'm referring to them as their first names here. I'm going to continue to do that from this point on because that will be the easiest to distinguish between the two Dahmers that I'm talking about. So Lionel, Mr. Dahmer, I suppose. Lionel, he presents a very fluid nonverbal communication and affirmation as he's recollecting this story, talking about going underneath the house. And you could see him looking about as he's recollecting different aspects of it, different sensory memories of the experience itself. But along with that, he's also nodding in affirmation as he's saying, like, this is a thing that he did. We did this, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. And it's this positive affirmation nod that creeps in there that just lets us know that he's being very synchronized with this. So on this level here, we could be like, oh, well, this would be an instance of an authentic story that he's telling. So we're seeing kind of what that would flow like non-verbally. And this will be useful to be able to use against other segments throughout the interviews or in other interviews and footage around. But let's continue watching.
And left the bones. So you pull the bones out from under the house, and your wife at the time and Jeffrey Dahmer, 4 years old, they're standing out, and he started to go through the pail of bones. He was just 4 years old.
Right.
Correct?
We were just discussing, my former wife and I, what I was doing, and I looked down and I saw Jeff
playing with the bones.
picking up the bones and dropping them back into the pail. And that was really the only time that I saw
Did he seem fascinated?
He didn't really seem overly fascinated, just sort of amused that they sort of dropped down and clanked and, you know, made a clanking noise.
He called them fiddlesticks.
And he said it's sort of like fiddlesticks, you know, these old pickup sticks.
So some things that I want to note that have already kind of fallen into Lionel's nonverbal patterns here is he's having difficulty vocally. He's stuttering and stammering a lot. So this question, this area obviously already is agitating him on some level. Otherwise that wouldn't be reflecting so clearly. Along with that, when he was saying that this was really the only thing that we saw, he has some agitation coming there. There's some pitch increase in there. There's a little bit of tone strain. Also his eyebrows raise. He leans back a little bit. And that is also a nonverbal spike. So in that area, if that's causing him that much agitation, and then with the leaning back and also along with that, a little tiny micro head shake. No, we have to ask, okay, so what caused you to do that burst there? What thought process was that? Right now it's a red flag. It does have some tendencies to maybe have distancing or desynchronization gestures, but we're not quite positive as of yet. However, what we do also want to note is that Lionel is setting this up to where, of course, he had little to no effect on how Dahmer, how his son, Jeffrey Dahmer, turned out. And as we know on the channel here, a lot of the times when there's an instance like this and somebody begs that they're completely 100% positively pure in this, that it oftentimes is not true. But let's check to see how this is. Let's continue forward.
Pickup sticks that you used to play as a kid, and that was his name for pickup sticks. And he just seemed amused, and I wouldn't say overly fascinated or taken with it, but yeah. But in retrospect, looking back now, like you say, everything is sort of colored with memories like that.
Are there other memories?
The time that he had a double hernia operation, when he, wondered whether he had his penis cut off, when he actually just had a double hernia operation.
How old was he
concerned about that. About the same age range, about 4
He
years
was sick a
old.
lot, was he not?
He was very sick with ear
Ear.
and nose infections.
Okay, so these are some things that I also want to make note of that aren't really pulled in other areas. Is this continually sick? And also there's this aspect of he had this very severe, painful surgery, operation, everything go on when he was very, very young. And that's a very developmental time in a child's life. So that's important to note. But as we're continuing forward here, something that you will also notice as we're going forward is that Lionel's attachment to Dahmer, to Jeffrey, is not one of emotional intimacy on any level. And that wasn't unheard of in the day for fathers to not have connections with their sons that way. So that does exist. And there are some other aspects as well that are coming into play. But in that, Dahmer alone was a sick child and was sick regularly. That in and of itself can cause difficulties in a family. And so we're seeing already a lot of possibilities for a not so great childhood, despite Dahmer himself or Jeffrey Dahmer himself and Lionel both insisting that the childhood was pretty okay. It's kind of contradictory, and their side doesn't make as much sense as to what has kind of come to play. But let's keep watching.
Infections, and he would get injections at the local hospital.
So when you look back to times where I think in the same age range, because we now know your personality is formed by the time you're 6 years old, so whatever's there is there.
Generally, yes.
You show me a boy at 6, we'll show you a man at 36, some people have said. So when the time he was walking through the house and asked you or your wife, what would happen if my navel was cut out?
I had a habit of recording him as a child. Just, the old type, reel tape, just miles and miles of it. And I had that transcribed about 1.5 years ago to regular cassette tape. And I came across this one portion where he asked me, Dad, what would happen? We were just engaged in conversation about his body. And he said, what would happen if we cut out my navel? And I can remember just passing it off at the time, and it was maybe just an innocent question.
That's one of those things kids say.
But now, looking back, yeah, it's just one of those things that kids say out of interest.
You say in your book.
Okay, so this is something else that I do want to make note about Jeffrey Dahmer's father and how he kind of viewed Jeffrey, it seemed. With this, even I did a lot of recording of him. The way that Lionel will refer to Jeffrey is almost as if Jeffrey is a specimen of some sorts. And sure enough, Lionel is a scientist, so that could be just perhaps how his verbiage goes. But even down to the fact that in very overt ways, Lionel said that he wanted people to do tests on Jeffrey to be able to figure out what it was that happened. Lionel's view of Jeffrey was not that of compassion, it didn't seem. It seemed to be so much more focused on that of curiosity with this scientific drive towards, which, that also being said, growing up as a child and having that be the vibe, so to speak, that you get from your parental figure, that does not do so great for developing good, strong, healthy connections with them, and also allowing you to be able to then build stronger and healthier connections throughout the rest of your social life. So with this already coming into play here, we're seeing a very young Jeffrey Dahmer who's portraying possibly some interesting sort of characteristics here in arguably largely turbulent household and separated from his father, the dominating figure in the family. This all does make more sense for who and how Jeffrey behaved, but let's continue.
Lionel, you say, I've come to believe that some of the compulsions that overwhelm my son may have had their origins in me. That must be a frightening realization.
It was one of the items that I wanted to investigate. Being a scientist, I want to throw out everything for
You're a scientist and a chemist.
Yes, right. And there are a number of things. Did he turn out, most people want to know why this happened.
Yeah.
Number one.
Immediately we all thought, when we heard these heinous, horrible stories, we thought, who abused him? Did you abuse him? Was he abused? Was he sexually molested? Was he beaten as a child?
Those were the first thoughts that came to your mind.
Yeah.
Probably. I considered all kinds of things. Was it environmental, genetic? Was it perhaps medication?
That small section bothered me a fair bit with how Lionel responded to that line of questioning from Oprah, because Oprah brings up the question of like, how does this happen? Yeah, obviously. And his response is this very soft, withdrawn, the only way that I could possibly describe the tone would be aloof tone that he takes in, where he's like, that's probably what you thought, wasn't it? Like this odd tone in there. And it's a very calculated, anticipatory tone to where it feels like he's talking down to, or as if he's anticipated this on some level or expecting this on some level. It is conveying a level of intellectual or moral superiority, even in just the tone and display of that. So that is fascinating to me. And he's going through and he's talking about all these different options that he has listed or that he was considering because he's a scientist and this and that and this and that. And what's interesting is that he doesn't answer the question right away. He does throw in these other details, and he's also doing little tiny micro shakes now in there. Now, could that be just synchronization with the thing? You wouldn't believe what I've dug up. I don't know. Possibly, but they are really, really small. And we've also had this other interesting tonal spike before that. So this is just an interesting, curious spot here. I'm not super certain on that. It's just a red flag. I would want to definitely try to like pick and probe a little bit more at this was he assaulted side of things before just like skirting right on by. But let's just keep watching the video.
Perhaps medications that were taken at the time of, in the first trimester. Was it the effect of, the popular subject now, media violence, and was it genetic? These are all things to consider.
Was he molested?
No, he wasn't molested.
Was he physically abused in the home?
No, he was not physically abused. No.
Okay, so these two responses also stray from how he was speaking just before. He not only verbatim responds the question with an answer of the exact same line, no, he was not, no, he was not. That exact verbiage still exists in there. Now, with that alone, he has a substantial drop-off in tone and pitch and just overall strength behind his voice. So it's very soft and very low. He also has a little bit of a lip compression and possible disgust micro-expression slip in there as well when he answers the first question. And now from this side, it's a little bit more difficult to see, but he answers and he has a no shake in there as well. So with the no shake, that is synchronized with what he is saying. No. That does make sense. So that would be pushing towards authenticity. There are the possibilities of the pitch changes in there and the force within the voice as well. And then also that micro expression of the lip compression and disgust coming in, all centered around that negative emotion. Perhaps there's still something there. At this point, there are still enough red flags for me to want to like still curve back around and approach again. But with the synchronization of the no, maybe. But it is still something that I find interesting. So let's continue watching.
No.
So when you analyze and you have a very analytical mind, that's what you do for a living. When
yes,
you go
that's
back,
right. That's my training.
Yes, and when you go back, and the reason you say you've written a story is to.
That I find interesting too. Yes, that's my training. So it feels as if he, at this point, is also trying to excuse how he is behaving in regards possibly to Jeffrey. But I do find that fascinating that he does like throw in, yes, that's my training, to add more like qualifier to that, as if we needed more qualifying to that. But I don't know, seemed defensive. Just make a note of it. Let's continue.
You've written a story is to try to make some sense of it.
Right.
As you analyze and go back over the years, trying to figure out how this could have happened, what have you concluded?
I've concluded that there are many more questions. I've answered some of the questions in my own mind, but
Like
very few. There's
what?
more questions that have been raised than have been answered. Well, I really do feel, I don't have really a lot of scientific evidence for this.
Okay, so some things that I am now seeing come up here. You can see him do a little postural change mixed in with some shrugs there. Well, I really do feel, and he's having difficulty with the stammering and stuttering that's kind of coming in there as well. But what you can also hear on top of that is you can hear the clicking inside his mouth, where his mouth has now become quite dry. So now he's showing a spike of interesting nonverbal communication about what he's concluded here. And even with his initial answer, his answer was that, oh, I concluded that I have a lot of questions. And so it's still this matter of dodging around the subject that some people found to be curious and fascinating. I also would agree on that, but let's continue watching just to see how this plays out.
But I feel, and this is a message that I wanted to convey to parents, that I feel that if a youngster, especially a male youngster, comes through his puberty and keeps everything in, bottles everything up inside himself, without talking to peers or family or friends, anyone at all, about their fears and angers and frustrations. I feel very strongly that it's possible that their all of those fears and
signs of
anger
trouble
can get mixed up
Yeah.
with the sexual awakening, such that they don't even understand
what's going on. What's
Right.
interesting, though, about Jeffrey Dahmer, your son, is that not these signs, according to what you've written here, didn't show up after, or during puberty. As you record,
right.
his first grade teacher noticed or had said to you when you went to the school to talk to her that he was a distant child, he didn't associate with the other children, that she had seen him on the playground pacing back and forth.
Just doing nothing.
Doing absolutely nothing. He was not communicative. He didn't wish to associate with the other children, performed his tasks, but did them with absolutely no interest.
Right.
I'm sure that there are a lot of parents who are listening who say, well, that could be my child. So does that mean your child can turn out to be Jeffrey Dahmer?
There's millions of people who are shy. I was definitely shy and
so
feeling inferior.
You felt that some of the signs that he had, you had experienced that too.
I was
shy.
empathetic, right?
Yes.
And I gave variance to that to some degree. I felt that I understood that.
Yeah, because he was just a shy kid.
Right.
But he was more than shy. He was fear-stricken.
There was something developing in his mind that so.
So during that time while Lionel's talking, something that I just want to make note of so you can kind of see how this does play across as well. This is an area where he's feeling a little insecure, defensive, talking about his own shyness. And with that, that's where we see these hunching shoulders coming up, a little bit of turning of the head, and you can hear his tone fall off and his pitch go up a little bit. So, I was shy. And so it's that defensive insecurity that creeps in there that we could see that it's understandable in that specific section. I don't think that if a child hangs out by themselves a lot, that means that they're going to end up like Dahmer. No, that would be a leap. So I can understand why he would be defensive. I was shy too. That makes sense. So in that context, that just even allows us to see this is how Lionel behaves when he's feeling defensive. If that pops up elsewhere where it doesn't make as much sense, well, then we have some reference for that. We can circle back around, maybe ask more questions, clarify. But for now, let's keep watching.
So bizarre that we just cannot imagine. Now, the difference there, I think, is that he did not have any reality contact checks, with people. I think that it's really incumbent upon parents to check to see if their kids are talking to anyone about their fears.
You opened this book saying, if the police had told me that my son was dead, I would have thought differently about him. If they told me that a strange man had lured him to a seedy apartment and a few minutes later drugged, strangled, and assaulted and mutilated his dead body. If they told me the same horrible things that they had to tell so many other fathers and mothers in July of 1991, then I would have done what they have done. I would have mourned my son and demanded that the man who killed him be profoundly punished. But I wasn't told what these other mothers and fathers were told, that their sons were dead at the hands of a murderer. Instead, I was told that my son was the one who had murdered their sons. I want, when we come back, to go back to the day when you had to be told that your son had done these horrible things.
I want to go ahead and pause that. So that's something that I do want to make note of that I did find at least somewhat admirable of Lionel's perspective is his ability to understand, or at least cognitively say that he understands various aspects of other people's perspectives. That self-awareness is appreciated, but that is just one aspect of it. Even with the writing of the book, a lot of people called him out for perhaps trying to take advantage of what was going on during that time. But now we're back here again. Let's continue watching.
I'm talking with Lionel Dahmer. Lionel Dahmer is the father of Jeffrey Dahmer, who has taken his own dark journey into trying to understand why his son became the monster that he did. And he writes of this in his book. It's called A Father's Story. A lot of people would say, Mr. Dahmer, you're just trying to capitalize on the crimes of your son.
Well, money is not my prime mover at all. My main...
Very fun right on that. So, well, sits back, clears throat, postural change, a lot of blinking in there. This confrontation has obviously hit, and his response to it is money is not my main mover, which is just a clever way of saying, yeah, you might be right, but that might not be the only reason why. And then with all that spike before that, then I'm not even necessarily sure that I buy that portion. But even he himself admits that, like, yeah, money drove this a lot too. So let's continue.
Mover is to find out what went wrong and to help people. And
could you have done that without writing a book, though, do you think?
I don't know. I've had so much interaction with people as a result of writing the book, so much feedback, that I don't think I would have had if I would have just gone out on my own and tried to, and I might not have investigated so fervently and
yourself
in depth.
Yes,
myself.
Let me ask you, do you think that there are other Jeffrey Dahmers being bred out there?
Yes, I do.
So that is a fair point from him. Perhaps if he hadn't written the book, then maybe not as much traction for it. But I don't know that it was his book that really set the precedent for understanding what happened with Jeffrey Dahmer. So it still did kind of just come out to be a capitalizing sort of situation. But that is fair. More traction that way, more publicity, perhaps, than if it was a scientific journal, something along those lines. Let's continue.
Yes, I do. I think that there's always a great... Our family was pretty much ordinary. I mean, I participated with Jeff in all kinds of activities. There's nothing really greatly out of the ordinary, yet something was...
Okay, this is interesting. Our family was very ordinary. There was nothing out of the ordinary, really hammering home this idea that everything was ordinary. I did everything with Jeff, and he breaks eye contact and he's looking away, has some vocal stuttering and stammering in there. This almost feels like he's really trying to hammer home, rather unconvincingly, that the home life was ordinary. And even just knowing some of the facets that we've already heard, there are some complexities that are in there, but that I guess an argument could be made that every single household has some complexity. So maybe that's ordinary, quote unquote. But in this area, it does feel like he's really trying to convince, please don't examine the family because we were just so ordinary. Don't look into that whatsoever. And that is still fascinating. Let's see how that plays out.
Was connecting in his sexuality and his developing youth that you and I just can't even relate to. And I think that there are many more out there. We have gotten letters, as a matter of fact. From people who say they have these same urges.
You say ordinary, but you were an emotionally distant father, would you say?
Well...
Like so many fathers, you're raised, you say, even in the book you say...
By distant, I mean...
That for you, loving was going to work every day, providing for the family, you know.
I wrestled around and, goofed around with my son a lot. But to say that maybe, I don't know if I was emotionally equipped to handle
whatever was going on with him.
Yeah.
But you went fishing with him.
Okay, so this is one of those indicators. So in the book, he says that he was not emotionally very present, as many fathers of the time were. But along with that, though, you could see him now starting to have some insecurity come in with some heavy chin-tucking behaviors, as he's trying to be like, well, maybe I wasn't like there, as he's starting to feel very defensive because of his inability to emotionally support his children. So with that coming in there and creeping in there, and he's feeling defensive about it, he's trying to say that, well, I did like play and stuff like that. And I mean, that's fair, but what causes the sort of things that Jeffrey Dahmer was working with is not like playing or roughhousing enough. It's around the emotional side of things. And so to have that knowledge as well, to know that that emotional distance was there, and the other facets of feeling kind of like a specimen, of being observed and recorded for various things, and these various facets, it does kind of help me understand the relationship that did exist between Jeffrey and Lionel, regardless of kind of what's been presented. But let's keep watching to see how that actually does play out here.
Fishing with him? Went fishing and did all the fatherly things?
We did tennis for years. We went tobogganing, sledding, participated in 4-H. We raised lambs together, chickens in 4-H for 3 years.
Wasn't he fascinated then, though, with the innards of animals?
You know, he never really demonstrated that to me, nor to anyone around.
I thought when you went fishing and you'd cut open the fish, he'd be all...
He did not demonstrate at that time. Actually, Oprah, all of this information came out at the trial. And at the time we were fishing, he never exhibited any type of
unusual
amazement, or his eyes didn't
when you're gutting the
widen
fish.
or say anything. Right. But at the trial, one of the expert witnesses, Dr. Becker, brought this out with him. And apparently he was...
So here we're hearing Lionel talking about how he was not able to pick up on any of the nonverbal tells of what Jeffrey was experiencing at the time, with like widening of the eyes or whatnot. And that's just another indicator of like, yeah, well, that's because that's not what it looks like. That's not how it would represent. You need to dig a little bit more into that. But with that, I still just find it interesting that he's still saying, oh, even in the areas where I said that he did interesting stuff throughout my childhood, I had no there was no suspicion, no idea, no anything with that. And maybe that's true. Perhaps Jeffrey hid everything perfectly. And the attentive father that Lionel said he was, the good father who maybe wasn't emotionally present, but definitely knew how to roughhouse pretty well with his kid, just didn't see it because of how amazingly well Jeffrey hid it. That could be the case. I don't necessarily buy that it was just Jeffrey's master manipulation that prevented Lionel from seeing anything. Perhaps Lionel did see and didn't want to admit, or he doesn't care enough to see, or had the inability to see because he had not been practicing how to be emotionally present for the people around him. So regardless of what's going on here, Lionel is still having a level of responsibility in this circumstance that he is still just trying to slough off completely. He's just an innocent guy that has been walking along this entire time, and all of this was more or less just kind of centered around Jeffrey and how Jeffrey did his own thing, and that's got to be it. And I'm not certain that would be the actual circumstances there. There's usually more nuance than that, but let's keep watching.
Apparently, he was, caught up with the color of the fish. But so in retrospect, maybe it was just an ordinary thing, but now, going back to what we said before, everything is sort of foreshadowed. You think back on...
When you were at his home, there was a time when you were at his home after he had moved to Milwaukee. I know we're skipping a lot here.
At my mother's home.
At your mother's home. And you had gone to look in a box, and he had said, don't open the box because there was, pornography in there?
I had found some pornographic material prior to that, and I thought there was pornographic material.
By this time, you know your son's a little off, though, right?
Well, I don't know. What do you mean by off? I mean, I felt
exhibiting
that
unusual behavior.
Interested in pornography, I guess, and there's probably a lot of young men that are interested. It didn't occur to me that was greatly different. In other words, I've always thought of him as being very, very shy, having feelings of inferiority, and yes, looking at pornography, perhaps.
So when you opened the box...
It didn't occur to me to be anything greatly strange.
You didn't see that there was anything to be greatly concerned about?
Well, my mother had found the box. It was unopened. It was locked. And I asked Jeff to open it. I came to her house, asked him to open it.
Thinking it was going to be pornography in there.
Yeah, right.
And he opened it, and what was there?
He resisted opening it.
Yeah.
Okay. I insisted. He got mad. He tore up the birthday check that I gave him that same day. It was his birthday.
How old was he?
And he said he was in his 20s, middle to late 20s. And he said, can't I have just 1 square foot? That's about how big the box was, of privacy. Let's just wait till tomorrow morning. He said, I'll open it then. Because my mother was there, and he said, let's not create a scene. Let's wait till tomorrow. I'll open it then. I'll show you what's in it. It's what.
Okay, so at this point, even from Lionel's perspective, to see that sort of behavior from Jeffrey. Now, obviously, Jeffrey had more of a subdued personality. Even if you go and watch his interviews and whatnot, his personality was not very verbose. He was not very emotive or grandeur with his gesturing. He's a very subdued guy. So for him to suddenly have this outburst like that, just out of the blue, it seems. Either one, this is extremely illogical and be a huge red flag, so that would be an indicator of agitation. There's something going on with that box that might be more than what was said. Or it could indicate that there are more difficulties in that relationship than what have been earlier stated. It seems as though perhaps there might have been an element of overt control in Jeffrey's life where he didn't have the ability to have control over aspects of his own life. And then with this also being with the separation between father and son, everything else that has come before this in the video, all in context, that makes more sense in that confrontation, that perhaps there was more to that lash out that Jeffrey had than what we're just finding here in this recollection. It could be an indicator of how that family dynamic, how father-son dynamic went there, but let's keep watching to see.
It's what you think. I still went downstairs after a tool to open it, and he grabbed the box. He said, wait, please. And I acceded. I just, I felt the feelings of empathy, that he was so shy and he just felt like he couldn't even have any
When you
privacy.
finally opened the box.
I didn't open the box.
Okay.
No. He brought.
Okay, so then in that point, it seems as though a kind decision was made by Lionel in respecting a little bit of Jeffrey's privacy and granting that to him. So now I have to wonder what led, what was the dynamic of those boundaries and crossing thereof between the parent and kids before? How did that play out as to what led to this specific instance that Lionel backed off so suddenly? I just find it interesting. There's obviously some dynamic there that we're missing for context, but we'll continue watching.
He brought it down the next morning, and there indeed were pornographic materials in there, which satisfied me.
Because that's what you thought was there.
Yeah, and frankly, Oprah, I don't know what I would have done if I would have opened the box, forcibly opened that box, and seen what was in there.
Because what was in there?
A human head.
When we come back, I'll ask Lionel what his son Jeffrey Dahmer said to him during their first conversation following his arrest. We're talking to Lionel Dahmer. We'll be talking to...
Now, I've also watched where Jeffrey was talking about that instance as well, and that does line up story-wise, even with how Lionel was telling it to across how Jeffrey was telling it. Both of those sides line up quite nicely. So that indicates that throughout that was an authentic recollection of that instance there. And it's very interesting to hear it from both sides and both perspectives as to how each person was thinking or processing on that one. So that is something that if you're ever interested, try to hop around on the internet and find that interview as well. And might even be able to be on here. And even with this recollection that he's speaking on, we're not seeing a lot of emotional display on his face. So we do know that as far as how Lionel does express his emotions, it's very muted. That leans into everything else that we've understood, but let's continue.
Talking to Lionel Dahmer. We'll be talking to other parents today who raised sons who ended up committing horrible crimes against society and other people's children. Do you see your son often?
On the average, once a month.
Once a month.
Sometimes a little bit more often, depending upon the need. There's been a lot of legal problems that have come up. And
what does he say to you? What did he say to you after the arrest?
Right after the arrest, the first time I saw him, he hung his head and looked very disheveled, and he said, "I'm so sorry, Dad. I don't know what to say. There's nothing I can say. I did it again." So, in other words, it was just another "I'm sorry." It really wasn't that much more intense than the other times when he committed less things like lesser crimes like drunkenness and so forth.
He was drunk from the time he was 16 years old, going to school drunk?
It was somewhere in the 16, 17, 18 year range, which was...
So this is also another thing that I want to point out is Jeffrey just hung his head, said, "I'm sorry, I don't know what to say, and I did it again." So this sounds like something to where Jeffrey is at least used to apologizing and saying, "I'm sorry," for various instances, and even Lionel backs that with being like, this was no different than all of the other many times that he said, "I'm sorry." And I'm wondering how much of Jeffrey's life was lived where he felt like he had to apologize for things that he felt or perceived or things along those lines. And that could be yet another facet that built into what he turned himself into as he grew up. But let's continue watching this.
Which was completely hidden from me.
He was going to school. He was an alcoholic by the time he was 16.
It appeared to be so.
Going to school drunk every day, trying to cope with all of his fears of not being able to socialize and so forth.
Never came home drunk, never came home in a state that gave him away. Picked up liquor on the way at a friend's house. And this happened at school, drinking at school apparently.
But by that time he was already roaming the neighborhood streets on his bike and collecting animal remains and...
Age 13, 14. It's just inconceivable. And it's also...
How was a child able to dismember animals and, take the skin off their bones? And I know you were a chemist and he had been around you and, working with you at times, but how was he able to do that without you or your wife or your mother, anybody knowing that's what was going on?
Well, we had about 1 3/4 acres of heavily wooded property, and the adjacent properties were easy to hide, and Jeff was very good at hiding.
This is your home there?
Yes. And there were so many areas that he could have done it in, and he timed it apparently when my former wife and I weren't around.
And that's where he killed his first victim there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That you knew nothing about?
I knew nothing about it at all. It's amazing. If only a neighbor, I knew after the fact, at the trial, I knew at that point that some of the neighbor kids knew that he was cruising around the neighborhood on a bike looking for, dead animals. That's all that they knew, apparently. But if I had known that, that would have been such a big red flag. I would have had him to a psychiatrist in a minute.
Do you think so?
I would have.
In retrospect, that would have been the flag.
But
all the other things weren't flags.
No, not really. They were always explainable. They were always within the realm of my experience, shyness, inferiority feelings. Nothing really exceptionally stood out.
So now what does your son say to you?
I want to go ahead and pause here as we're just thinking back through this still. Lionel is painting this picture of how Jeffrey was able to effectively more or less hide this from his parents fully, from everybody around him fully, from a very young age and very efficiently, which, if this is the case, then there's a number of things that are playing in there. Obviously, Jeffrey would have to be a very intelligent child to be able to do all of these different things so effectively to fool every single adult in his life, including his science father, who has a very analytical and observant mind. As he himself has said, he has been trained to do. But with that, they're not able to catch on to any of their son's behaviors that are interesting. I'm finding it interesting that there were some things that could have definitely been picked up on, but there wasn't enough attention being given to pick up on them. And then along with that, if, say, Lionel is telling the truth here and that Jeffrey did this so brilliantly to himself, kept it very secret. The other question is, well, why would you be urged to do that? Why would you be so urged to keep everything so secret? And how would you be able to do it so well by such an early age? To me, the most logical explanation for that would be that he probably had been doing it for a minute. Jeffrey had been used to hiding things from his parents, or at least his father, who was very detached. And at the time, according to at least Lionel, his mother had some health issues and mental issues as well during that time, which made some complexities happen there. So even if Lionel's telling the truth, this kind of just leads me to believe that then that means that Jeffrey had been needing to hide things from what should have been a support in his life for a long time before that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so effective at it. But let's continue watching the rest of this.
Well, My wife, Sherry, and I visit him.
Your second wife?
Yes. Routinely. We talk to him every week on the phone. We're very, very close. We've gotten very close.
Do you still love your son?
Since his arrest, much more close.
Do you still love your son?
I still love my son. I'll always stick by him. I always have. And I still love him very, very much.
Do you see him as sick?
I think he has a very deep psychosis. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think he has something that he does not understand. And I would really love, if he were amenable and it would not destroy him mentally, I would like to see him studied. That was one of the reasons I wrote the book.
Because you'd like
to provide funds for research, for treatment of him, to donate to victims groups, to create new groups, and so forth and so on. Sherry and I discussed this extensively.
To see him studied?
Studied and helped. Right.
Do you think he can be helped?
I think if we can get back to the time where this hypothetical mixing of his sexuality with his frustrations and anger,
now,
maybe we can get to it.
Do you see anything that you or your wife at the time could have done to prevent this?
Well, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of mental, my former wife had a lot of mental and physical problems. And we were so occupied with those problems that it was difficult to concentrate on anything else.
Or to see that your child was becoming increasingly lost.
Increasingly shy, that's all that we saw. I mean, there was, I would encourage any parent, though, who has problems, and there are millions of people who have a divorce, who have marital problems, draw out information in all kinds of ways, with your minister, with your rabbi, with
because now
teachers,
you can see
whoever.
where the trouble was breeding itself.
The psychologist that I have seen to help me through this said he didn't even know if he could ever draw out anything, to elicit anything, to show these bizarre thoughts that were developing Jeff's mind. But it's worth a trial. It's worth a checkup for any parents. Take their kids. If they're extremely shy, it doesn't mean that they have to go to a psychologist. But go for a checkup if they're not talking to anyone at all about their fears and anger and so forth.
Something's going on.
Do
is what
something.
You're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where that ends. So some things that happened there at the very end as well that I did want to make note of. Obviously, the first thing that popped into Lionel's head when he was talking about his son and things that he wished would happen is that this son would be studied. And then it was like, oh, good Lord, that's also my child. I wish he would be helped too. And it's like, oh, well, thank you, Lionel. I appreciate that. Very loving of you. Along with that, then he also was bringing in that health difficulty with the mother in that situation. So he himself, even there, admits not able to be present. Can't be. And he said in his book that he's emotionally not present. So two different areas he's now said that he really just couldn't be present to catch any of these things. And then in other interviews, he said that he was very emotionally attached and very close to his son. So there's some contradictory things in there as well. And then finally, something that was not seen in this interview, but is in some other ones. And if you would like me to go and watch some of the other videos from Lionel to help build some more of this backstory of Jeffrey, then I will. But in some other interviews, he is very overtly homophobic. And even in this, his solution to getting information from the child, instead of it being, hey, let's make myself a little bit of a safe place for this child to talk to me about stuff, his solution is, well, why don't you just get the rabbis involved and the priests and everybody else involved so that if there is something, then at least the person feels ganged up on. So that's going to be pretty welcoming for them as well. So I would say that a better admonishment, not to just elicit stuff from your kid if you're worried about it, try to make yourself a space to where you're going to be more available for them. And then if you have been available and have taken the time to do that, and you're still having trouble, then figure out something with some professional help, something along those lines. This was an eye-opening thing for me to be able to see how Lionel didn't necessarily create Jeffrey, but he most certainly didn't hinder Jeffrey going down the path that Jeffrey went down, if only from just the mistake of being purely absent and rather analytical towards his son. So if you did like this video, go ahead and hit the like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already. I upload once or twice a week, probably once, maybe I upload sometimes, so if you would like to be able to see those, have at it. If you want to go check out the socials, I'm on there, or somebody on my team will be on there. Check out Patreon, just everything like that. All the links in the description of this video. Thank you again to Hunt a Killer for sponsoring this video. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for today. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome, as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.